On a cold October morning in Manhattan, Richard Blackwood's body lay shattered in the courtyard of Sterling and Associates, another apparent victim of Wall Street stress. But when the FBI discovered that millions had vanished from the company, the senior partner's sudden death began to look less like suicide and more like permanent silencing. What no one imagined was that the perfect crime would be unraveled by something as trivial as a $25 parking ticket.
The ambulance sirens still echoed through Manhattan streets when Detective James Morrison arrived at the scene. The glass and concrete jungle of the financial district seemed to press down on him as he stared up at the 47th floor of the Sterling and Associates building, where a single window stood open, like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. "What do we have?" Morrison asked the first officer on scene, his breath visible in the crisp October air. "Richard Blackwood, 53, senior partner at Sterling and Associates," Officer Martinez replied, consulting his notepad. "Building security found him at 7:42 a.m. Appears he jumped from his office window sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. Morrison crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Blackwood lay twisted at an unnatural angle, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. The detective's experienced eyes swept the area, cataloging every detail. Something felt off, but he couldn't quite place what. "Any witnesses?" Morrison asked, standing and brushing off his coat. "None so far. Building was empty except for the overnight security guard, and he was doing his rounds on the lower floors. Says he didn't hear anything unusual." The detective looked up again at the open window. The wind whipped through the urban canyon, carrying with it the scent of coffee and exhaust fumes. In the distance, the city was waking up, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded in its shadow. Inside the Sterling and Associates building, chaos reigned. Employees clustered in small groups, their faces pale with shock. The usually bustling trading floor had fallen eerily silent, computer screens glowing like digital tombstones in the dim morning light. "He seemed fine on Friday," whispered Amanda Foster, a junior analyst, her colleague. "Maybe a little stressed, but nothing out of the ordinary. Richard always worked late." Morrison moved through the crowd, his detective's instincts on high alert. In his 20 years on the force, he'd seen plenty of Wall Street suicide. The pressure, the money, the constant stress. It was a recipe for disaster, but something about this scene bothered him. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt interminable. When the doors opened, Morrison stepped into Richard Blackwood's corner office. The room was immaculate, except for the open window and a few scattered papers on the desk. The October wind had blown some documents around, but otherwise, everything appeared undisturbed. "Looks like he was working late," Morrison muttered, examining the desk. A half-empty coffee cup sat next to a stack of financial reports. The computer was still on, displaying what appeared to be spreadsheets filled with numbers and transactions. The detective moved to the window, peering down at the courtyard below. The fall would have been instant, no time for regrets or second thoughts. But as he examined the window frame, something caught his eye. There were no scuff marks, no signs of struggle. For someone contemplating suicide, Blackwood had been remarkably tidy. "Detective Morrison," a woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a tall, elegant woman in her 30s, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "I'm Evelyn Harrington, senior analyst here at Sterling. I heard about Richard. It's just terrible." Morrison studied her face. Her eyes were red, but her composure was almost too perfect. "Did you know Mr. Blackwood well? We worked together for 5 years. He was a brilliant man, but the pressure, it gets to everyone eventually." She gestured toward the window. "I suppose it finally got to him too. Had he seemed depressed late? Any indication he might harm himself?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "Richard was always stressed about the markets, about client portfolio, but suicidal? I never would have thought." She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself. As Morrison continued his preliminary investigation, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from the picture. The scene was too clean, too perfect. In his experience, desperate people weren't usually so methodical, but without evidence to the contrary, Richard Blackwood's death would likely be ruled a suicide, another casualty of the unforgiving world of high finance. Little did Detective Morrison know that this seemingly straightforward case would soon attract the attention of the FBI, and that a small parking violation would become the key to unraveling one of the most sophisticated criminal schemes in Manhattan's history. The perfect crime was about to meet its imperfect end. 3 days after Richard Blackwood's body was discovered, the Sterling and Associates investigation took an unexpected turn. What had begun as a routine suicide case suddenly demanded federal attention when the firm's internal audit revealed a disturbing pattern of financial irregularities that couldn't be explained by market volatility or poor investment decisions. Agent Vincent Torres received the call at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning. 22 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had taught him that the most dangerous criminals often hid behind the veneer of respectability, and Wall Street provided the perfect camouflage for sophisticated white-collar crime. "Torres here," he answered, already reaching for his coffee. "Agent Torres, this is Detective Morrison, NYPD. We've got a situation at Sterling and Associates that's going to interest you. The Richard Blackwood suicide. It's not as simple as we thought." Torres was already putting on his jacket. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that involves missing millions and a dead man who might have been the only one who knew where the money went." The Sterling and Associates building stood like a monolith against the grey, October sky when Torres arrived. The FBI agent's trained eyes took in every detail as he made his way through the lobby. The marble floors gleamed under expensive lighting, and the walls were adorned with awards and photographs of the firm's most successful deal. It was the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost with the click of a mouse. Detective Morrison met him at the elevator bank. "Thanks for coming so quickly. This thing's getting stranger by the hour. Walk me through it," Torres said, as they rode up to the 47th floor. Blackwood jumped Sunday night. Tuesday morning, the firm's compliance officer runs a routine audit and discovers irregularities in several client accounts. We're talking about systematic manipulation of investment portfolio, unauthorized transaction, and what appears to be a sophisticated money laundering operation. Torres nodded grimly. "How much are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate? $8 million. But the real number could be much higher. The scheme's been running for at least 2 years, maybe longer." When they reached Blackwood's office, Torres immediately understood why the case had escalated. The room had been transformed into a makeshift command center, with FBI forensic accountants hunched over computers and stacks of financial documents covering every available surface. "Agent Torres," a woman approached from behind a desk covered in printout. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, Forensic Accounting. We've been working on this since yesterday, and what we've found is impressive." Torres studied the documents she handed him. "Impressive how?" "Whoever did this is brilliant. They used a combination of shell company, cryptocurrency exchanges, and offshore accounts to move money in ways that would be nearly impossible to trace under normal circumstances. The digital fingerprints have been scrubbed clean. The paper trail has been deliberately fragmented, and the timing of the transactions was coordinated to avoid triggering any automated fraud detection systems. But you found something." Agent Chen smiled grimly. "We found patterns. Tiny inconsistencies that suggest the person responsible has intimate knowledge of both the firm's systems and federal banking regulations. This isn't some amateur operation. We're dealing with someone who understands the system well enough to manipulate." Torres moved to the window where Blackwood had allegedly jumped. The October wind still whistled through the gap, but now the sound seemed less like nature and more like a warning. What was Blackwood's role in all this? "That's where it gets interesting," Morrison interjected. According to the other partner, Blackwood had been acting strangely for about a week before his death. He'd been staying late, asking questions about account discrepancies, and scheduling meetings with the compliance department. "You think he discovered the scheme?" "We think he was getting close. Maybe too close." Torres examined the crime scene with fresh eyes. The pristine nature of the office, the lack of any struggle, the perfect positioning of the body in the courtyard below. It all suggested a level of planning that was inconsistent with a desperate suicide. "Has anyone been eliminated as a suspect?" Torres asked. "Not yet, but we've been focusing on employees with access to the affected accounts. The list is shorter than you'd expect. Only about 12 people had the necessary clearance levels and system access." Agent Chen approached with another stack of documents. "Agent Torres, you need to see this. We've been analyzing the transaction pattern, and there's something that doesn't make sense. The person responsible for this had to be physically present at specific times to authorize certain transfers, but they also had to be elsewhere to maintain their cover." Torres studied the timeline she'd prepared. "What do you mean?" "Look at this. On September 15th, a series of high-value transactions were initiated from Blackwood's terminal at 3:47 a.m. But the same day, those transactions were confirmed and finalized from a completely different location in the building at 4:12 a.m. The security logs show that only one person had access to both locations during that time window. Who? That's what we're trying to figure out. The access logs have been tampered with, but we're working on recovering the original data. Torres felt the familiar tingle of a breakthrough approaching. After 2 decades of chasing white-collar criminals, he'd learned to recognize the moment when a case shifted from impossible to inevitable. Someone had made a mistake, and mistakes were what brought down even the most careful criminal. "I want to interview everyone who worked closely with Blackwood," Torres said, starting with the people who had access to his office and the affected accounts. "And I want complete background checks on anyone who expressed concern about Blackwood's behavior in the weeks leading up to his death." "Already on it," Morrison replied. "We've got interviews scheduled starting this afternoon." As Torres prepared to leave Blackwood's office, he paused at the desk where the dead man had spent his final hours. The coffee cup had been removed by forensics, but the financial reports remained. Torres picked up one of the documents, a portfolio analysis dated the day before Blackwood's death. In the margin, someone had written a single word in red ink: impossible. The agent stared at the notation. Richard Blackwood had discovered something that had cost him his life, and now it was Torres's job to figure out what that something was. But as he looked out at the Manhattan skyline, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge wasn't finding the killer. It was proving that the perfect crime had actually been committed. The investigation was just beginning, and somewhere in the building below, a murderer was watching, waiting, and probably planning their next move. The conference room on the 35th floor of Sterling & Associates had been converted into an interrogation center. Agent Torres sat across from a parade of employees, each more nervous than the last, as the investigation began to focus on the inner circle of people who had worked closely with Richard Blackwood. The first interview was with David Chen, a portfolio manager who had been with the firm for 8 years. He fidgeted with his tie as Torres studied his file. "Mr. Chen, when was the last time you spoke with Richard Blackwood?" "Friday afternoon, around 4 p.m. He called me into his office to discuss the Morrison account. He seemed agitated." "Agitated how?" "He kept asking about transaction authorizations, wanting to know who had approved certain transfers." I told him. "Everything went through normal channels, but he didn't seem satisfied." Torres made a note. "Did he mention anything specific about irregularity?" "Not directly, but he kept saying things like, 'The numbers don't add up,' and 'someone's been clever.' I thought he was just stressed about quarterly reports." The second interview proved more revealing. Amanda Foster, the junior analyst who had spoken to Detective Morrison on the day of the discovery, seemed genuinely shaken by her boss's death. "Amanda, tell me about your relationship with Richard Blackwood." "He was my mentor. When I started here 3 years ago, he took me under his wing. Richard was brilliant but demanding. He expected perfection from everyone around him." "Had his behavior changed recently?" Amanda paused, choosing her words carefully. "About 2 weeks ago, he started asking strange questions. He wanted to know about access logs, who had been in the office after hours, things like that. I thought maybe there had been a security breach. Did he suspect anyone specifically?" "He never said, but..." Amanda hesitated. "He did mention that he was concerned about some of the senior staff. He said talent and opportunity could be a dangerous combination." Torres felt his pulse quicken. "Which senior staff members?" "He didn't name names, but there was tension between him and Evelyn Harrington. They'd been having closed-door meetings for weeks." The mention of Evelyn Harrington immediately caught Torres's attention. She had been present at the crime scene, had easy access to Blackwood's office, and possessed the technical skills necessary to execute such a sophisticated financial scheme. When Evelyn entered the conference room for her interview, Torres studied her carefully. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, her designer suit impeccable despite the stress of the past few days. "Ms. Harrington, thank you for your time. I understand you were one of the last people to work closely with Richard Blackwood. Richard and I collaborated on several high-level portfolios. He valued my analytical skills and often consulted with me on complex transactions. Several witnesses mentioned tension between you and Mr. Blackwood in recent weeks. Can you elaborate?" Evelyn's expression remained perfectly controlled. Richard had become paranoid about the firm's security protocol. He was convinced that someone was manipulating client accounts, but his concerns were based on hunches rather than evidence. I tried to reassure him that our systems were secure. "Where were you on Sunday night between midnight and 6 a.m.? "At home, sleeping. I live alone, so I can't provide witnesses, but my building has security cameras that would show I never left." Torres made a note to verify the security footage. Did Richard ever express suicidal thoughts to you? Never directly, but the pressure had been getting to him. He'd been working 18-hour days, barely sleeping. I was actually worried about his mental health. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, but Evelyn's answers were consistent and logical. Too logical, Torres thought. After 22 years of investigating financial crimes, he'd learned to be suspicious of witnesses who had perfect explanations for everything. The final interview of the day was with Marcus Williams, the firm's IT director. A nervous man in his 40s, Williams had been responsible for maintaining the computer systems that the killer had so expertly manipulated. Marcus, I need to understand how someone could have accessed the systems to move money without triggering security alerts. It would require administrative privileges and intimate knowledge of our fraud detection algorithm. The person would also need to understand cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore banking regulations. How many people at Sterling have that level of technical knowledge? Williams shifted uncomfortably. Maybe 3 or 4. Richard understood the systems, obviously. Evelyn Harrington has a background in financial technology. There are a couple of others, but what? Evelyn's the only one who's ever asked detailed questions about security protocol. She claimed it was for compliance purposes, but some of her inquiries went beyond what she'd need for her regular duties. As the day ended, Torres found himself sitting in Blackwood's office, staring at the window where the supposed suicide had occurred. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture, but crucial elements were still missing. Detective Morrison joined him as the sun set over Manhattan. What's your assessment? Blackwood discovered the financial scheme and was killed to keep him quiet. The suicide was staged to end the investigation before it could begin. Any primary suspects? Torres was quiet for a moment. Evelyn Harrington has the skills, the access, and the opportunity, but she's also smart enough to know we'd focus on her. If she's responsible, she's planned this down to the smallest detail. So what's our next move? We dig deeper, check her alibi, analyze the security footage, and look for any mistakes she might have made. Because no matter how perfect a crime appears, there's always something the killer overlooked. As Torres prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn Harrington was watching him, calculating his next move just as carefully as he was calculating hers. The game of cat and mouse was just beginning, and both players knew that only one could win. The FBI's New York field office hummed with activity, even at 7 a.m., but Agent Riley Matthews had been at her desk since 5:30, surrounded by towers of documents that most investigators would consider mundane. At 28, she was the youngest member of the Financial Crimes Unit, but her reputation for finding needles in haystacks had already made her indispensable to cases like the Sterling and Associates investigation. Agent Torres found her hunched over a computer screen, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, coffee-stained papers scattered around her workspace like fallen leaves. Matthews, how's the deep dive going? Riley looked up, her eyes bloodshot from hours of screen time. I've been analyzing every piece of municipal data connected to the Sterling building and its employees for the past 6 months. Traffic violations, building permits, utility records, anything that might give us a timeline or pattern we've missed. Torres pulled up a chair. Riley's methodical approach had solved cases that had stumped more experienced agents, and he'd learned to trust her instincts even when her methods seemed unconventional. The thing is, Riley continued, scrolling through endless spreadsheets, whoever planned this was incredibly thorough about covering their digital tracks. But people forget that crime isn't just about computers and bank accounts. It's about physical presence, real-world actions that leave traces in systems they never think about. She pulled up a map of Manhattan with dozens of red dots scattered across it. These are all the locations connected to our suspects over the past 3 months. Work addresses, home addresses, restaurants where they use credit cards, parking garages where they validated tickets. Anything unusual? Most of it's exactly what you'd expect. But look at this. Riley zoomed in on a section of Lower Manhattan, about 8 blocks from Sterling and Associates. On September 15th, the same day those suspicious transactions were initiated, someone received a parking ticket at this location. Torres leaned closer. September 15th was a Sunday. What would any of our suspects be doing there on a weekend? That's what I'm trying to figure out. The location is interesting. It's outside a 24-hour diner that's known for being discreet, the kind of place where people go when they don't want to be seen. Riley's fingers flew across the keyboard as she cross-referenced the parking ticket with employee schedules and security log. According to Sterling's record, none of our suspects were supposed to be working that Sunday, but we know someone was in the building initiating those transactions. Can you trace the parking ticket to a specific person? That's the problem. The ticket was issued to a rental car, paid for with cash, but rental companies keep records, and I'm working on getting access to their files. Torres watched as Riley navigated through databases with the skill of someone who had spent years learning to speak the language of digital breadcrumb. Her approach was painstaking and methodical, but it had cracked cases that flashier investigative techniques had failed to solve. Riley, I want you to focus specifically on Evelyn Harrington's movement. She's our primary suspect, but her alibi for the night of Blackwood's murder seems solid. If there's a crack in her story, you'll find it. Already on it, Riley pulled up another screen showing Evelyn's credit card transactions, cell phone record, and building access. She's been careful, but careful people sometimes try too hard to look normal. They create patterns that are almost too perfect. Over the next several hours, Riley dove deeper into the data, following digital trails that would bore most investigators to tears. She analyzed subway card usage, reviewed security camera footage from nearby buildings, and even studied weather patterns to verify alibis. As the afternoon wore on, she began to notice something strange about Evelyn's documented activity. Her movements were logical and consistent, but they lacked the small inconsistencies that characterized normal human behavior. It was as if someone had carefully planned each action to create a believable but fabricated timeline. Torres, you need to see this, Riley called out around 4 p.m. I've been comparing Evelyn's documented activities with the timing of the suspicious transactions, and there's something wrong with the picture. Torres rushed over to her desk, where Riley had created a detailed timeline spanning several months. Look at September 15th again. Evelyn's credit card shows a purchase at a coffee shop near her apartment at 2 p.m. Her subway card was used at 2:30 p.m. Her building's security system shows her entering at 3 p.m. It's all perfectly logical, but it's too perfect. Real people don't move through their day with such precise timing. They backtrack, they change their minds, they make impulse purchases. Evelyn's timeline reads like someone who planned every step to create an alibi. Riley's discovery was just the beginning. As she prepared to dig even deeper into the municipal record, she had no idea that a simple parking violation was about to become the key to unraveling one of the most sophisticated crimes in FBI history. The smallest details were often the ones that brought down the biggest criminal, and Riley Matthews was about to prove that theory once again. Riley Matthews had been staring at the same parking for 3 hours, and the more she examined it, the more convinced she became that she was looking at the crack in Evelyn Harrington's perfect facade. The violation had been issued on September 15th at 11:47 p.m. outside Murphy's Diner on Chambers Street, 8 blocks from Sterling & Associates and miles from Evelyn's Upper East Side apartment. Torres, you need to see this now, Riley called across the bullpen, her voice carrying an urgency that made several agents look up from their desks. Agent Torres approached her workstation, where Riley had assembled what looked like a room of documents, photographs, and computer screen. What did you find? The parking ticket that's going to destroy Evelyn Harrington's alibi. Riley held up a copy of the municipal violation. License plate number KDR 4829, issued September 15th at 11:47 p.m. for parking in a no parking zone outside Murphy's Diner. Whose car? That's where it gets interesting. The vehicle was a rental from Enterprise, paid for in cash under the name Sarah Mitchell. But when I cross-referenced that name with known aliases and false identifications, it doesn't exist in any legitimate database. Torres studied the ticket more carefully. You think Evelyn used a fake identity to rent the car? I think Evelyn was very careful about covering her tracks, but she forgot that parking tickets are processed by a completely different system than the ones she was manipulating. Municipal violations go through the Department of Transportation, not the police databases she would thought to scrub. Riley pulled up a street map on her computer. Look at the location. Murphy's Diner is exactly 8 blocks from Sterling & Associates in a direct line. It's the perfect meeting spot for someone who needed to coordinate with an accomplice before heading to the office to commit murder. Can we connect the rental car definitively to Evelyn? I'm working on that. Enterprise keeps security footage of their rental transactions, even cash payments. I've got a warrant. Request in process. Riley's fingers flew across the keyboard as she pulled up additional data. But there's more. The timing of this parking ticket completely destroys her alibi. Torres leaned closer as Riley displayed Evelyn's documented timeline for September 15th. According to her statement, she was home all evening, watching Netflix and going to bed early. Her building's security system shows her keycard being used to enter at 8:30 p.m. and there's no record of her leaving again. But the parking ticket was issued at 11:47 p.m. Exactly. And here's the really damning part. The transactions that moved $8 million from Sterling's client accounts were initiated at 12:15 a.m. on September 16th. Someone drove from Murphy's Diner to Sterling & Associates, murdered Richard Blackwood, staged his suicide, and then executed the financial transfers. Riley pulled up security camera footage from a bank across the street from Murphy's Diner. The image quality was poor, but it clearly showed a figure in dark clothing walking quickly toward a sedan, parked in the exact spot where the ticket was issued. The timestamp on this footage is 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the parking ticket was written. Someone was definitely there, and they were in a hurry. Torres studied the grainy footage. Can you enhance the image enough to identify the person? I'm working with the tech lab, but the lighting is terrible and the angle isn't great. However, I can tell you that the person is approximately 5'6" and wearing what appears to be a dark coat or jacket. That matches Evelyn's height and the outfit she claimed to be wearing that night. The breakthrough felt electric. After days of following digital trails and analyzing financial records, they finally had physical evidence that placed their primary suspect at a location that contradicted her alibi. But Riley knew that a parking ticket alone wouldn't be enough to convict someone of murder. There's something else, Riley continued, pulling up another screen. I've been analyzing the pattern of parking violations in that area over the past year. Murphy's Diner is in a legitimate no parking zone, but tickets are rarely issued there because it's not a high traffic area. The parking enforcement officer who wrote this ticket was doing a random sweep. It was pure chance that he happened to be there at 11:47 p.m. So Evelyn couldn't have anticipated it. Exactly. She planned for digital surveillance, security cameras, and electronic record, but she couldn't plan for a bored parking enforcement officer deciding to check an obscure street at midnight. Torres felt the familiar rush of a case turning in their favor. What about the rental car? Any luck tracking down the footage? Should have it within the hour. But I've already confirmed that someone using the name Sarah Mitchell rented a Toyota Camry with license plate KDR 4829 on September 14th and returned it on September 16th. The timing matches perfectly with our timeline. As Riley continued to build her case around the parking ticket, both agents knew they were witnessing something remarkable. The most sophisticated financial crime in recent FBI history was being unraveled by a $25 municipal violation that the perpetrator never saw coming. Riley, I want you to prepare a complete timeline showing how this parking ticket contradicts every aspect of Evelyn's alibi. Include the rental car records, the security footage, and the connection to the Sterling transactions. Already working on it, Riley replied, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of a puzzle finally coming together. But Torres, there's one more thing. If Evelyn was at Murphy's Diner that night, she wasn't there alone. The diner keeps receipts for all transactions, and I'm betting we're going to find evidence of a meeting that will blow this case wide open. The parking ticket that Evelyn Harrington had dismissed as an insignificant inconvenience was about to become the cornerstone of a murder prosecution. Sometimes the smallest oversights brought down the most careful criminals, and Evelyn was about to learn that lesson in the most devastating way possible. The confrontation room at the FBI's New York field office felt smaller than usual, as Agent Torres prepared for what he knew would be the most important interview of his career. Across the table sat Evelyn Harrington, her lawyer beside her, both maintaining the composed facade that had served her so well throughout the investigation. But Torres had ammunition now, a parking ticket that would shatter her carefully constructed world. Ms. Harrington, thank you for coming in voluntarily, Torres began, his voice calm and professional. I'd like to revisit your statement regarding your whereabouts on the evening of September 15th. Evelyn's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Bradley Morrison, leaned forward. My client has already provided a detailed account of her activities that evening. She was at home, as confirmed by her building's security system. Torres smiled slightly. Actually, that's what we need to discuss. He slid a copy of the parking ticket across the table. Can you explain why a vehicle rented under the alias Sarah Mitchell received a parking violation at 11:47 p.m. on September 15th, just 8 blocks from Sterling & Associates? For the first time since the investigation began, Torres saw a flicker of something cross Evelyn's face. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to confirm what he already knew. I have no idea what that is, Evelyn replied, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. I've never heard of Sarah Mitchell, and I certainly wasn't driving around Manhattan at midnight. Torres opened a file and removed several photographs. These are from Enterprise Rental Cars security cameras. The person renting the vehicle paid cash and provided identification for Sarah Mitchell. He placed the clearest image in front of her. The height, build, and hair color match yours exactly. Security camera footage can be misleading, her lawyer interjected. You can't definitively identify my client from these images. You're right, Torres, but we can definitively place the rental car at Murphy's Diner through the parking, and we can place your client at Sterling and Associates through the unauthorized transactions that began at 12:15 a.m. Exactly 28 minutes after this ticket was issued. Torres leaned back in his chair, studying Evelyn's reaction. Here's what I think happened. You discovered Richard Blackwood was getting close to exposing your financial scheme. You arranged to meet someone at Murphy's Diner, probably the person who helped you stage Blackwood's suicide. You parked illegally because you were in a hurry, never thinking that a routine parking violation would expose your entire operation. Evelyn's composure was beginning to crack. This is completely circumstantial. A parking ticket doesn't prove anything. By itself, no. But combined with the financial evidence, the timeline discrepancies, and the rental car record, it paints a very clear picture. Torres pulled out another document. We also found receipts from Murphy's Diner showing 2 meals purchased at 11:30 p.m. on September 15th. One was paid for with cash, the other with a credit card belonging to Marcus Delacroix, a man with a very interesting criminal history. The mention of Delacroix's name caused Evelyn to visibly flinch. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she shook her head. Marcus Delacroix, Torres continued, served 8 years for conspiracy to commit murder. He was released from federal prison 6 months ago and has been working as a freelance security consultant ever since. We arrested him this morning, and he was very eager to discuss his recent employment. Torres opened his laptop and played an audio recording. Delacroix's gravelly voice filled the room. She contacted me through an encrypted messaging app, said she needed someone eliminated, made to look like suicide. The payment was $200,000, half up front, half after the job was done. We met at Murphy's Diner to finalize the detail. Evelyn's face had gone pale, but she remained silent. Delacroix provided very specific details about how you planned Richard Blackwood's murder, Torres continued. The meeting at the diner, the drive to Sterling and Associates, the way you used your access card to get him into the building after hours. He described how you lured Blackwood to his office under the pretense of discussing the financial irregularities he'd discovered. The recording continued. She was smart about it. Made sure I knew exactly how to stage the scene, how to make it look like the guy jumped, but she got greedy, wanted to use the chaos after his death to complete some big financial transaction. That's when things got complicated. Torres paused the recording and looked directly at Evelyn. The parking ticket places you at the scene of your conspiracy meeting. The rental car gives us physical evidence of your deception. The diner receipts prove you met with a known criminal. And Delacroix's testimony details exactly how you orchestrated Richard Blackwood's murder. Evelyn's lawyer was frantically scribbling notes, but Torres could see the defeat in both their faces. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? Torres said, tapping the parking ticket. You spent months planning the perfect crime. You manipulated financial systems, created false identities, staged a convincing suicide, and stole $8 million. But you were brought down by a $25 parking violation that you never saw coming. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Then slowly, Evelyn began to speak. Richard was going to destroy everything I'd worked for, she said quietly. 5 years of my life building those portfolios, making millions for clients who treated me like I was invisible. Richard discovered the transfers and threatened to report me. He said he'd ruin my career, have me arrested, so you had him killed. I tried to reason with him first. I offered to return the money, to leave the firm quietly, but he wouldn't listen. He said I was a thief and a disgrace to the profession. Evelyn's voice grew harder. He called me into his office that Sunday night, said he was going to the FBI first thing Monday morning. I couldn't let that happen. Torres leaned forward. What happened in the office? Marcus was waiting in the stairwell. When Richard realized what was happening, he tried to fight, but Marcus is professional. It was over quickly. We made it. Looked like suicide, just as planned. And the financial transfers? I completed them while Marcus staged the scene. It was always about the money. Richard's death was just necessary to protect my work. As Torres concluded the interview and placed Evelyn Harrington under arrest, he couldn't help but marvel at how a simple parking ticket had unraveled such an elaborate scheme. Riley Matthews had been right. The smallest details often brought down the biggest criminal, and Evelyn's quest for the perfect crime had been derailed by the most imperfect oversight imaginable. Them Down had become legendary within the FBI, a cautionary tale about how the smallest oversights could topple the most elaborate criminal scheme. But as Torres prepared to close the Sterling and Associates case permanently, Agent Riley Matthews knocked on his door with an expression that immediately put him on alert. "Torres, we have a problem," she said, holding a manila folder. "I've been doing routine follow-up on the financial recovery, and I found something that doesn't make sense." Torres looked up from his paperwork. "What kind of something? The $8 million that Evelyn stole? We've only recovered $6.2 million. The remaining $1.8 million was transferred to an account that doesn't exist in any database we can access. Maybe it's in one of the cryptocurrency exchanges we haven't fully investigated." Riley shook her head. "I thought so too, but look at this." She spread several documents across Torres's desk. The final transfer happened 3 hours after Evelyn was arrested. Someone else had access to her system, someone who knew she'd been caught and was liquidating the remaining assets. Torres felt a familiar chill run down his spine. "Are you saying Evelyn had a partner we didn't know about?" "I'm saying someone at Sterling and Associates is still active. The transaction was initiated from inside the building, using administrative credentials that were never connected to Evelyn's scheme." Riley pulled up a security log on her tablet. "Look at the building access records for the day of Evelyn's arrest. Someone used Richard Blackwood's credentials to enter the building at 2:30 a.m., 4 hours after Evelyn confessed." Torres stared at the log entry. "That's impossible. Blackwood was dead, and his access should have been revoked. It should have been. But someone with high-level administrative access reactivated his credentials remotely. Someone who knew the investigation was focused entirely on Evelyn and wouldn't think to monitor a dead man's security clearance." The implications hit Torres like a physical blow. There was someone else involved from the beginning. Someone who let Evelyn take the fall while they escaped with nearly $2 million. Riley nodded grimly. "And they're still out there, still inside Sterling and Associates. Still watching, still waiting, and now they know exactly how we investigate financial crimes." Torres reached for his phone to call the Sterling and Associates security office, but Riley stopped him. "Torres, there's one more thing. The person who reactivated Blackwood's credentials, they did it from Amanda Foster's computer terminal." The case that had seemed so perfectly solved suddenly felt like it had only revealed the tip of a much larger iceberg. As Torres stared at the evidence of a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone had imagined, he realized that the parking ticket had only caught one criminal, while the true mastermind had been watching from the shadows all along. The perfect crime hadn't been Evelyn's elaborate financial scheme. The perfect crime had been convincing everyone that she was working alone.